Hi everyone. I'm going to take us along with some of what's in the book, but then add in a couple other things that I think are important. As we start thinking about how we communicate, I want to talk about some broad stuff and then we'll hit real interpersonal communications next time. But to start, we really need to first think about some of the schools of thoughts that were happening in the 20s, 30s, 40s. And there were three that were really popular that we will see throughout the semester. The first was the Frankfurt School. This was Marx, Bardot, Levi-Strauss. This was really media supporting dominant thinking, and we'll see this in a couple different ways in terms of the hypodermic needle theory, some of the semiology theory that we'll study throughout the semester. The Frankfurt School was a bunch of sociologists and psychologists, and they were really looking at how media supported that dominant thinking. So they didn't really see the channels, they didn't necessarily look at the audience, they looked at just the media and its power structure. Laszlo and Luckman and Lazarsfeld sort of came around the 30s and sort of built off of what the Frankfurt School, these guys were in America, and they started looking more at media effects and propaganda. Lazarsfeld was originally from Germany, and so he was really interested in some of the propaganda media, whether radio, movie, and so they sort of took this idea of media thinking and sort of took media effects and propaganda and how the media actually changes people's opinions and how they create meaning. During this time then, another school sort of came about, and this is the Chicago School, and your book talks about these a little bit. The Chicago School started to realize that it wasn't necessarily in the media, it was in the person, it was in the background, the experiences, and so they started saying, how do we create meaning? Is it really from this media, effect constantly giving us messages, or is it something internal? And so for today, I really want us to think about how we create meaning. How does that internal communication go? And the first way to think about it is Ogden and Richard's triangle of meaning. I found this, I really like this image. I apologize for it being a little blurry, but you'll notice that in this is sort of a triangle of meaning. There's a term, and when we hear that term, it goes to us and we sort of think of a concept. So if somebody were to say orange to me, I automatically have words that come into my mind or pictures, and so maybe it's an orange and it's a color. Maybe to you it's sun. And I refer these things to something I've seen, some object in the physical world, something that I've experienced in my life. So color or an orange, I relate those to those things. And so for that, my term, it really stands for that referent. So specifically, if I said vacation, the term was vacation, my concept, I automatically will think about times in my past, vacations I've had. So that's my referent, vacations I've had. And so my concept quickly becomes maybe a palm tree, because I'm thinking of sun and relaxation. So my concept, when you say that to me, would be palm tree. Now yours may have gone straight to a skiing vacation. And so your concept in your referent has to do with skis and snow. So we really have to think about how people develop meanings. And this really is going to come into play as we start talking about how we communicate with each other. And so I want you to do something quickly for me. I want you to think, what do these words mean to you? If I say ugly creature, if I say movie, if I say superstar, disgusting food, love, what do you think about? We all are going to have different opinions on what these words mean. For example, the classic rhetoric of what is a Pepsi? Is it a Coke? Is it a soda? Is it pop? All depends on your source of information, the relevance in your life. So where you're from, your history, it all goes back to that referent in your mind. So the same thing with ugly creature. You may think chicken. I may think the Loch Ness Monster. It all depends on what we've seen, where we've gone. Meanings really are in people and not in words, and that's what we started seeing in the theory around the time of the Chicago School. That it wasn't necessarily going to be that easy for media to just tell us what to think. We've got something that we're bringing in ourselves. So, how do we communicate? There's sort of the three ways. There's that interpersonal communication where we communicate with ourselves. There's that interpersonal, so intra and interpersonal talking between each other. So these can be gestures, these can be writings, these can be images. And then there's the mass communication, communication from a person or a group to a large audience. And so right now we're going to focus more on that interpersonal communication, but as the semester goes on, we're going to hit that mass communication and how we make meanings and how that affects mass communications. So Lasswell was one of the first around this time to start thinking about mediated communication. And he said the basics of communication. He said who says what in which channel to whom with what effect. So we look at who it is, what are they saying, how are they saying it, and who are they saying it to, and does it have any effect. And so Lasswell started this theory, this model, and Shannon and Weaver sort of came along and adjusted this communication transmission model. And this is sort of one of the models that I'm sure you've all seen, you've all experienced at some point this model. It's very basic and takes communication down to a basic level, but it's important to understand it before we move forward. So all messages, all communication starts with a source over there on the left, and we develop a message. So maybe it's me telling you to go pick up a hamburger for dinner. And so I come up with this message and I encode it. So I decide how do I want to give it to you. And I decide what channel. So maybe I want to text you a picture of a hamburger. Or maybe I want to text you, go get me a hamburger. Or I write you a note or I call you. So the channel is the method of getting that encoded message to you. And then you decode it. So you decide what I mean by hamburger. Do I mean raw meat? Do I mean a hamburger from McDonald's? Do I mean maybe a soy burger? What is your understanding? So there's that transmission of meanings to you. And then a lot of times what we found is this model stayed for several years until they've realized there's a feedback loop that comes, and that's what that arrow is that feedback loop. And as they continued to research this, they then started saying, wait a minute. There's things that can happen in the channel and that encoding and decoding. And that's where we see a lot of research when we look at interpersonal communications. It was in that sort of noise area.